Hey, have you ever felt like there's something wrong with you? Like maybe something's missing? Like I just don't have the talents, I don't have the smarts, the looks, the charisma, the abilities, the gifts, whatever it is that you think you're missing that's keeping you from doing that which you really want to do. Hey, I have good news for you. You have all the innate talent, all the innate ability that you need. The problem's not what you're lacking. The problem is what you're missing. When I say missing, it's what you're not seeing. It's what's been in you all along. Stick with me. I'm going to help you discover these things. Welcome to Craig Walker Coaching. My name is Craig Walker, and I help people win over the paralysis of self-doubt to live the life that they were born to love. Now today, I'm going to show you how to discover what you thought was missing in your life. I'm going to help you see that you're not lacking anything to do all the good things that God had in mind when He made you long ago. Now, speaking of missing what's right in front of you, I recently heard a story of a game warden who had been pursuing this serial poacher for years, and he'd been unable to apprehend him. Didn't even have a clue who the guy was. And the warden said, this kind of poacher, he's not after the meat. He's just out there for the thrill of the kill. Said they're generally sociopaths, and they're generally very dangerous. Now, after years of pursuing and not finding, one night coming home from a night out with his wife, the warden looks up on the side of the mountain, and he sees this spotlight searching across the side of the mountain, and he thinks, this is my guy, and I'm gonna catch him. So dropping his wife off at home, he returned to where he saw the lights. Equipped with a vehicle for stealth pursuits, the warden makes his way up into the mountain, and he positions himself so that he's ready to make the arrest. Now, the officer said, I could hear what sounded like rapid fire or machine gun fire back in the mountains. The warden said, I know this mountain like I know the back of my hand. So where he had turned up, he had crossed a ravine and gone up the side of the mountain. I knew there was only one way out for him, and it was the way that he had gone in. So he positioned his vehicle right down above the ravine so he could wait for him to cross on the way back. That's where he would make the arrest. The officer waited, and he waited. And the guy never came back. Taking his flashlight into his hand, he walks down to the ravine to inspect the water where the guy had crossed. And he knew that he would have left fresh tracks in the mud, or there would be fresh bubbles, water bubbles, air that had been trapped in the guy's tires when he had crossed. He took his flashlight and he stood there at the creek, and there was nothing. He saw nothing. Confused and thinking, the guy's giving me a slip again. He goes back to his vehicle, gets in it, and he returns home. A year later, out of the blue, the warden receives a call from a deputy letting him know that they had a man in custody for murder, for possessions of drugs, for cooking meth. And during the interrogation, the man had bragged about poaching elk. So the deputy called the game warden to ask, do you want to come down and interview and see what you can learn? Well, the warden was all too happy to do so. He agreed. Sure enough, this was the guy that had been killing the elk. They had known about 30 elk that had been killed, wounded, and maimed. And that's just the ones that had been reported or been found. There no telling how many more there were. Now, just as the officer stood to leave, the poacher said, oh, you might want to tell your wardens down there that somebody's got angel wings. And curious, what in the world is he talking about? He turns and he looks at the guy and said, what do you mean? The guy said, one night about a year ago, one of your wardens chased me up the mountain, and he got into a position where he was waiting for me to come back. He said, I never came back, so he got out of his car and he walked down into the ravine, and I was waiting. I already made up my mind. I was hiding on the other side. I'd made up my mind, as soon as he crosses the water, I'm going to spray him. Meaning that he had decided that he was going to open fire with his Uzi machine gun and he was going to kill him. The officer said, my legs were shaking. I trembled. He said, had I crossed the water, the guy was right there in the dark waiting to kill me with a machine gun. I'd be dead. And here's a question. How did this seasoned officer of 22 years not see the tracks? My son, Jeremy, was listening to this story with me, and Jeremy said, there's only one explanation for this. This is divine. God had kept the man from seeing what was there all along. Now listen to me. Just as surely as there were tracks in the mud that night, you have gifts, you have talents, you have abilities, attractiveness that you've never seen. You've had these abilities all along. You just haven't seen them. When you see yourself the way God sees you, you will praise and glorify God for the way He made you. Like King David, oh God, thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. You will say, oh God, thank you for the way you made me. I love being me. What are these things that keep us from seeing the obvious? What blinds us to the truth about ourselves? Well, the good news is there's a story in the Bible that you and I can look at, and I think we'll gain some insight and maybe what's causing us not to see what's been there all along. This is the story of Abraham, Hagar, and her son Ishmael. Now, for a quick recap, God had promised this guy by the name of Abraham that He would bless him and that He would give him a son, and through the son, this Abraham would become a mighty nation. Now, there's a problem though. You know what it is? Abraham's wife, Sarah, is barren. Now, after years of waiting for God to fulfill His promise, years of waiting to get pregnant, Sarah finally gives up. She says, honey, look, we've been waiting a long time, and I just can't have kids. I'm way past the years of having babies. So I want you to take my servant Hagar, sleep with her, and perhaps God will give you a son. Now, I've always tried to imagine how Abraham responded. Thinking with my modern man mind, only after a small amount of feigned resistance, Abraham agrees. Hagar conceives, she has a son, which gets named Ishmael. But again, there's a problem. This was not God's plan. God never wanted Abraham to have a son by Hagar, but by his wife Sarah. This was a miraculous son that God would give to prove to the world that I got my hand on this guy. I've chosen him. So in time, God tells Abraham, send her away. She and her boy must leave. So Hagar, now she's a single parent. After living in affluence, is forced out on the streets to make it on her own. I know this sounds like a divorce recovery message in the making, but that's not why we're here. Hagar, now wandering aimlessly in the desert with her baby, comes upon a well of water which she never sees. Having lost all hope for a life worth living, she lays her baby down. She walks off to leave him to die. Listen, this is depression at its worst. She cries bitter tears. In her bitterness, she senses, as she cries, God speaking within. From within, she finds this hope beginning to build up into her soul, like God's got a plan for her son. Now hope is reborn. She opens her eyes and she immediately sees a well that had been there all along. Here's the deal. You've got gifts, talents, abilities. They've been there all along. What could keep you from seeing the things that God has already put in you? Let me just tell you 3 things that I think are blinding. 3 things that maybe God Himself will turn the lights off to keep you from seeing if you don't deal with these 3 things. Are you ready? Number 1 is jealousy. I know, you're probably thinking, but I'm not a jealous person. I understand you thinking that. So listen, follow along, okay? You can imagine, we'll talk about Hagar first, her feeling a tad bit jealous of Sarah, right? And Isaac, come on. Isaac, or Abraham rather, was a wealthy man. Sarah and Isaac, because, wife and son, they live on easy street because of Abraham. Hagar now realizes what she's lost. She's forced out on her own. She's thinking, I've got to make it all by myself with a son, a baby. How are we going to do it? Me and the boy, we've got nothing. Jealousy, this is a big deal. Don't miss this. Jealousy blinds us to the good things that God has given us. When you're focused, this is what happens. We get focused on what we can't have that maybe somebody else has, all of a sudden we can't see all the things that we do have. There's another great story in the book of Genesis. It's that story of Abraham, or Adam and Eve rather. You know, the serpent comes along and deceives Eve. He gets her to look at the one thing that she can't have, and suddenly she forgets all the things that she does have. This is a bad deal. This is what jealousy will do. The dominant thought then becomes, well, I don't have, but I want. And I can't because, well, I'm not like him or I'm not like her. If God made me a little more like this, then I could. Jealousy is one of those sins that we overlook. I think we let ourselves off the hook thinking, I'm not jealous. I don't mind that Joe has talent. I don't care that Jennifer has good looks. What bothers me is, God, why didn't you give me a little more talent? Why didn't you give me a little more of the good looks, Here's what I was jealous of. I wished I'd been born into my aunt and uncle's family, not into my family. My family was messed up. And I was messed up because of the family that I grown up in. I didn't mind that my cousins got to be born in that family. I just didn't like it that God didn't let me be born in that family too. You see, I coveted their life. I coveted their upbringing. And by the way, coveting, that's a sin too. Do you wish that God had caused you to be born somewhere else? Maybe in the land of Ur? You know what I'm talking about? If only I were tall-er. If only I were smart-er. If only I were pretty-er. If only I were witty-er. If only I were strong-er. If only I were more determined-er. You see, this is what you need to hear. God knew all these things about you. He knew the hardships, the struggles that you would face in your life. He knew the genetics that you were going to be born with. That means the family that you would be raised in. He knew your mama, your daddy, your bubba, your sissa. He knew it all. He knew all those things. And he looked at you and said, oh yeah, this is the life through which you can glorify me. God didn't make a mistake with you. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing missing. Nothing that when yielded to him that he can't use to do great things through you. Here's a second thing that will blind you. And by the way, I have dealt with or dealing with, for the most part, all three of these. The second one is doubt. You see, we doubt that God's there for us. We doubt that he's really made us this way, that he has a great plan for our life. Hagar thought she and her son were done. God's got plans for Isaac, and it's so easy to look at Isaac. God's got plans for Isaac. God's got plans for Sarah, but God's not got plans for us. We're on our own. But God did have a plan for Ishmael, and it also included caring for Hagar. The scripture says that God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what's wrong? Don't be afraid. Hey, God's heard your boy crying as he lies there. Go to him, comfort him. God says, for I will make him a great nation, make a great nation from his descendants. God had a plan. Listen, this I know about you. God has plans for you too. He wants to do great things for you. He says you're his masterpiece, created anew in Christ Jesus, if you put your trust in Jesus, so that you can do the good things that he planned for you long ago. He wants to do something good through you, so good that others will be bragging on him for the next 100 years. And when you get it, you'll brag on him too. So here's what I'd say to you. Live every day, live every moment like God's for you. Now, I'm not saying that you won't have hardships. I'm not saying you're not going to have temporary failures, setbacks. I'm not saying any of those things at all. I'm just saying live like God is for you. He created you for something, and he wants you to do it, and he's going to help you. You see, the question that you want to answer is, what do I want? What are my passions in life? What are my dreams? And then start working toward them like God is for you, because he is. You need an education? Get the education. You need training? Get the training. You need skills? Then make them sharper. Become an expert in what it is that God, you just believe in your heart. What are your passions, your dreams? Because these are the messages that God is using to call you to be you. Now listen, I'm not saying if you want to be a nurse and you're a sole provider for your family, then you need to quit your day job and go to college and just say, God's going to take care of me and everything's going to be fine. But what I am saying is you can start taking steps towards fulfilling your dream. You can start living like God is for you and doing one little thing at a time. Now, speaking of doing one little thing, I'm going to tell you something else that really blinds us. When we do this, it shuts our eyes. It just does. I'm going to give you this one thing, and I think this is one of my favorite to talk about because I made this mistake so many times in my life. This will wreck you. It will. It's the sin of avoidance. I have a theory that the gifts and the talents that God has given you, they're not just inside of you, but they're right in front of you. Like a well of water, right there waiting to be discovered, is there all along. And track with me on this, okay? Hagar sat her baby down and walked off because she didn't want to watch him die. There was a well right there, but for some reason or another, Hagar just hadn't seen it. I have a hunch I know why she hadn't seen it. Honestly, when you're destitute, a drink of water, what's that? What's that going to do for me? Sustain me for another hour or two or half a day, then I die? So what does God do when we're just so down? He speaks hope into our soul. And he told Hagar, I've got a plan for you. When you begin to see that, or to believe that God really does have a plan for you, that he's created you to do good things, when you begin to take God at his word, a little hope can be reborn. And what you need to do with that little hope is to do the one thing that you've been avoiding that's right in front of you. For me, I struggled with this thing of putting off. I would start a project, and I just wouldn't finish it. And about halfway through it, this is where I would bail, I would go start another project. Now, some of you hear that and think, what a moron. And I look back now and say, yeah, I don't get it. Why would I do that? But for those of you who are more like me, you're more visionary by nature, you get it. But I had failed just to follow through. And I thought, what difference will that make? If I just do this one thing, what difference will that make? But when I began to get a little hope, like, okay, I'm going to trust you, God, that you've got a plan for me. And I'm going to do what's right in front of me. And I started doing just those little things. I always thought I was a terrible leader. I always prayed, God, make me a better leader. Suddenly, I found myself becoming a better leader. The answer was right there in front of me all along. What are you avoiding? What is it that you've been putting off? Is it a project that God, just this little thing that God's asking you to do and you're not doing it? Is it follow through? Is it keeping your word? Is it keeping commitments? Is it developing punctuality? What little thing is it that you've been avoiding developing? It may be the kind of thing that's just keeping you from seeing all that God has placed within you. So now it's your turn. What are you going to do? Are you going to deal with jealousy? That which is blinding you? I know it's not that you don't want anyone else to have it. It's that you want God to give you more of it. And he's already given you all that you need. You need to develop whatever it is. Is it doubt? You just don't believe that God is for you. You think God's going to help somebody else and he's blessed them, but not you. Come on now, confess your doubt. What is it that's blinding you? Is it that you've been avoiding the little things? You've not been doing these small things that are derailing you from developing the gifts and the talents that God has given you. And they're blinding you to what's inside of you. It's your turn. Which one? Which one of these? Maybe all three like me you need to deal with, so that your eyes can be opened to what's right there in front of you. The gifts, the talents, the abilities, they've been there all along. Listen, if you struggle with these things, my request, my hope for you is you'll reach out to me and let's start a conversation. Maybe I can help you to open your eyes to all the great things God has for you. Reach out to me at Craig Walker Coaching. Let's start a conversation. Until next time, may God help you to live the life that you were born to love.